if you see, say, animated movies that use very low resolution representations of people, like South Park's a really good example, because the animation in South Park's very iconic and simple. It actually makes almost no difference to following the story. And so that shows you how iconic your perception really is. It can be replaced by very simple icons, and you instantly adapt to that. You know, and so we can go and see the Lego movie, Batman Lego movie, for example, and the fact that it's Batman, which is an abstraction to begin with, and then it's made out of Legos, is almost irrelevant to following the plot. And so some people have compared our perceptions to the user interface on a computer. You know, when you're interacting with your computer, you don't really interact, so to speak, with the computer. There are iconic representations on the screen of the computer that you interact with, and those represent, obviously, they share some functional relationship with what's going on in the computer, but mostly they're there so that you, using your perceptual structures, can interact with the computer in a manner that's easy for extremely intelligent apes, roughly speaking. Now, so one of the problems that you have to solve in the world, because it's so full of detail and so complex, is how do you actually see the world? How do you actually perceive it? And it isn't really self-evident that that's a problem, because you think when you look at the world that it just presents itself to you. But it's a tremendously complicated problem, and that's partly why developing artificial intelligence systems that can actually see the world and act in it in any real way has proved to be a much more difficult problem than people had originally supposed. Because, you know, we were told maybe from the early 60s onwards that such things as speech to text or object recognition or robots that could operate in the world were only 2 or 3 years away. And well, I mean, we're in a situation now where there are some fairly complicated robots built, but they're still really in their nascent form. And it's because perceiving the world and then figuring out how to act in it turns out to be a much more complicated problem than we originally thought, because the borders between things are not self-evident, and what level of resolution you should be perceiving things at for, say, maximal functional utility is also not self-evident. It's also tied up very strangely and in ways we don't understand with the nature of your embodiment, you know. So, for example, we tend to see things that are handy because we can pick them up and manipulate them, and we can make use of them. And so to some degree, our brains are evolved to make the world manifest itself to us in a set of discrete usable tools. That's a reasonable way of thinking about it. And they're discrete and usable because we have a certain kind of biological platform, you know, because we have hands and mouths, and because we walk in a bipedal manner, then it's logical for us to break up the world in a manner that makes operating in this body maximally useful. But that doesn't mean that there's a straightforward one-to-one relationship between our perceptions of things and the things themselves. Quite the contrary. And that's partly, of course, we know that because with any perceptible object, like I could conceptualize you as one thing for all sorts of purposes, but if I'm trying to solve a complex problem in relationship to you, it's going to be very difficult to determine how to conceptualize you. So if you come to me because you're suffering from a psychological problem of some sort, then I have to figure out, you know, is it organic? Is it there's actually something physiological wrong with you? And I need to know what level of analysis I would probably conceptualize you at. Is it psychological? And if it's psychological, is it functional? Like, do you lack the skills, or do you lack the ability to apply the skills? Or is there something really gone wrong with your family? Or maybe it's even a reflection of an overarching sociological problem. We know, for example, that when the unemployment rate goes up 1%, psychiatric hospitalizations go up 5%. And so then you might ask, well, you know, if there's a huge rise in depression and anxiety across the population, and at the same time there's a huge increase in unemployment, you have to ask yourself what level of perception would best be suited to solve that problem, because it isn't self-evident that it's psychological at the level of the individual. Anyways, my point is that perception is a very difficult problem. And so